It's Shaun here. I'm the founder and CEO of payment communication platform Glider. We help organisations optimise and streamline billing processes and experiences for their customers. My background, I've been working in the digital space for 15 odd years, working with organisations to transform their products and services for increasingly mobile consumers, and working on a range of industries and products over those years. We all know that consumers' habits and expectations for the way they engage with organisations has rapidly changed over the past few years, and this continues to accelerate. Organisations like Uber, Apple, PayPal, Afterpay have played a key role in, changing the way and expectations that consumers are wanting to engage. Apple, well known for their great UX and security components. Uber reducing friction in payment experiences and various other ways that they've been able to deliver a disruptive transport mode into various markets around the world. PayPal and Afterpay, immediacy, security, a whole bunch of ways that they've been able to disrupt. And so from our perspective, we see a lag in the way that service-oriented organisations have delivered billing experiences and looking to try and keep up with, what their customers are expecting in the ways that they are paying bills. So, customer experience certainly is a key differentiator. And in these conversations, I'm talking to a range of people who have really interesting and diverse experiences around customer experience from various businesses and organisations and different markets, and looking to garner some of their insights and share that with our audience out there. So today, I'm really excited to have Kareem Al-Bassam with me, someone with really deep knowledge of the payments and credit space, having held senior product roles in companies like Afterpay, PayPal, Tyro Payments, and S1, which is one of the largest bill pay consolidators in the US. So Kareem's now consulting and advising large and small companies on all things payments and credit related in Australia and globally. And Kareem, hey, welcome. Great to have you here. Would you be able to share a little bit about your career to date and touch on some of those experiences and what you're focused on now?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much for having me. And I really hope that this is a valuable session for everybody that listens to it. I'll try to be pretty quick on career background and all of that, because hopefully through the conversation and discussions, kind of the context will come out. But give you a little bit of background. I've been in payments now for about 20, 25 years. And I think I was just very lucky, frankly. Everybody works very hard. I work very hard, but I've also been lucky. And one of the ways I think I was lucky was that I was able to get exposure very early on in my payments career to both the issuing, the acquiring side, or the bank payment side, et cetera, that diversity that sometimes people can get trapped in debit card for their whole life. I got to play in all those different sectors, and then in about 40 different countries around the world. So I worked for a system provider, and it allowed me to really travel with that company and observe, how did they do it in Norway? How did they do it in South Africa? What about Malaysia? What about Mexico? All of that, living in various parts around the world. So that was super valuable. You mentioned a number of organizations, PayPal, Tyro, Afterpay, all here in Australia. PayPal had moved me over. And prior to that, I'd been mostly in the systems provider land. So providing solutions to banks or billers or others. And as I said, I'm really excited to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Kareem. Yeah, that's the thing with payments. It's so different in all those different markets. So the ability to get some of that first-hand insight on the ground is something that most or many would never have access to. So certainly keen to tap into that a little bit more on this conversation. And so you've worked on some pretty amazing products and innovations in your career. Which technology innovations, yours or more broadly, do you think have had the most impact in reshaping customer expectations and experiences in recent years?
I mean, we talk a lot about essentially the generation of payments that happened recently, which is a lot of card on file and billing, whether that's a PayPal or an Uber or someone else that tries to save a card and make life easier for the consumer so they're not having to log in and all of that. I think that era is now beginning to change as we see a lot more tokenization, and tokenization is one of those words that's wrought with a number of different meanings and expectations. But at the end of the day, trying to remove ourselves from where we were 20 years ago, where heavily dependent on a piece of plastic for cards that had a number printed on it and all of that sort of stuff. So suddenly as a biller, you're starting to get updated card numbers when they're lost or stolen or those sorts of things. So I think the benefits of tokenization, replacing some of the rigidity with card on file, is a real interesting place to be right now. I mean, what I would say is there's not that much in the world that's really, really, really unique and different in my experience. It's about taking different ideas from different places and seeing how they match, and also letting the development of technology open windows for you. So tokenization would be an example of that. But if I think of taking really interesting ideas from different places and putting them together in a market that wasn't used to it, I think Afterpay is a great example of that. What Afterpay did in breaking an installment with no fee to the consumers, not new globally. It's 20, 30 years old in Brazil, in South Africa, and other places. Slight nuances, but fundamentally, that's been in those markets for quite some time. Or Turkey would be another great example of a market to go check out, see how they do things and how they solve problems. So that was a really neat product because it was taking a tried and tested model from other places, but modifying it to fit Australia and then later other markets like the UK, Canada, the US, where people were heavily schooled in the concept of revolving credit with interest. And it kind of said, hey, there's another way. And that other way doesn't have to cost you a lot. It doesn't have to be punitive. And that was a great deal of fun to work with.
Yeah, super interesting. And just in terms of Afterpay, that obviously it's a very well-known brand these days. When you joined it, how big was the organization? At what stage was it at?
It was already a public organization. So the company had gone public pretty early in its existence. And I joined right around the merger between Touch Corp, who was essentially the system and technology provider. And so I was brought on with a new CTO to help bring that merger together, but also build out the platform now that it was proven in Australia for other markets globally, and essentially, keep that X growth rate continuing to go for a number of years.
Yeah, no doubt, super complex, and you hear so many stories of businesses doing really well in one market and then trying to deploy the same kind of thinking and experiences into new markets, and things being missed culturally or in other ways, right? So, yeah, that insight that you had in those other markets and bringing it through, no doubt invaluable there. So, I think that plus the PayPal kind of background, they both are businesses or products that come to mind, when you think about innovative customer experiences and I guess changing the way that consumers are paying for products and services, and I guess establishing new forms of innovation in the market for adoption at real scale. What do you think billers and services companies can learn from those retailers that were leading the way in adopting these products early on when it comes to creating great CX or customer experiences?
Yeah. I mean, in my view, and we might talk about the biller side of my life in payments separately, but I think at a fundamental level, how do we try to separate ourselves in these environments from action and resolution to what we want the outcome to be for all parties? The consumer is not thinking about getting from step one to step two. They want to check out and be gone in e-commerce. Consumers paying bills or catching up with bills or those sorts of things. They want it to be as easy and simple as possible. And it's very outcome oriented as opposed to what are the steps I need to move to. So I think at a meta level, It's how do you make it outcome as opposed to very action resolution, one step, two step view. I think separately, I'd also say, given my biller experience, don't just copy what e-commerce does. Like e-commerce has a lot of money, a lot of thought, a lot of data beyond how do you optimize that checkout to do slightly different things than billers want. E-commerce, they would love you to add another item to that cart. That would just make their millennium, not necessarily what you're trying to do as a biller. So don't just copy what things have been done. And the other thing is billers have to serve the last mile. Afterpay is an example. In Australia, we accepted credit cards and debit cards. That was it, right? In biller land, for those of you that are watching, it's a tough world. There are a number of different types of payment. Maybe you're doing the old ePay, biller payments and loads at a post office or a news agent, those sorts of things. Billers live in a complicated world, often a legacy.
No, they're good points. I do see the synergy or the, I guess, comparisons between that checkout experience and looking to just bring a super simple, task-oriented checkout experience. Like technology ultimately is just the enabler, right? Like customers don't care about it as much as it can sit in the background. The better, really, from their perspective, they just want to achieve or complete a task as simply as possible within their busy lifestyles. And so, the challenge is that I think over many years, many organizations and those different types of back-end type, experiences or products, technologies, etc., have meant that there's a lot more complexity at play than you would probably realize. And so,
but they don't want to. They kind of don't want to see how it's done. They just want it to work. So when I talk to my product teams and people that are building things, I've been in payments for a long time. I enjoy it. It's all those things. But at the end of the day, payments is it's a utility in a way. It's a bit, I like to say it's kind of like a toilet.
Okay.
When you pull the handle, you just want it to work.
That's true.
You don't want to know about the piping. You don't want to know about the tank or anything like that,
so
right?
True.
You just want it to, you pull the handle and it works. Now, if you pull the handle and it doesn't work and it backs up, everybody's got a lot of trouble, right? You want to make sure that doesn't happen, and you've built a robust system to save yourself having to mop up. But at the end of the day, consumers do not care. They don't want to care. They don't want to know.
Yep.
And I think as we continue this conversation around where are things potentially heading, the people that can satisfy that consumer need to not have to get involved in executing a task largely from their perspective is really powerful.
Yeah, no, I think just adding to that as well, though, it's pretty rare that a bill paying experience is ever something someone looks forward to, right? Like but you've got to pay bills, and so beyond just the actual product experience of engaging, the things an organization could do to make that easier, like Afterpay was doing, right? Like allowing them to pay in 4 equal installments, bring it forward, and sorting out the sort of organizational issues behind the scenes. With actually getting the funds into the organization's bank account. There's a lot of things that can happen beyond the technology components to allow the consumer to pay more easily. Right?
And to kind of empower them, right? Like one of the things that I think it's one of my favorite, maybe my second favorite PayPal product ever is, for years had been deeply hidden. You'd have to search for it. And what was it? It was my billing subscription to Netflix, where I, as the consumer in my wallet, had the ability to delete that or suspend it or whatever, which is not the world consumers live in. And frankly, it's a lot of mental accounting and keeping up on things, you really don't want to as a consumer.
Yeah.
It's unnecessary cognitive load in a lot of ways. So it's interesting to see how the ball is moving in that direction so that consumer within their bank should have more control over those. And there's benefits, of course, having a card on file and just hitting it whenever you want as a biller, but actually giving that consumer more choice is something you can see in payments over many years in different instances has actually grown the pie for everybody and resulted in basically a happier customer and happier staff.
Yes, spot on. Yeah, I think you were alluding there to obviously the advances in real-time payments and Pay2 replacing direct debit and what you're going to be able to do inside your banking apps to switch on and off those agreements with the billers and various businesses you've got a ongoing relationship with? PayPal was a little
in bank payments, also card payments. You're beginning to see that as a result of some of this tokenization work, or MasterCard's one click, as an example, is another flavor of that. PayPal, we forget about PayPal because it was born such a long time ago, but it really is a very interesting petri dish that's been operating for 20 plus years and thrown a lot of things at the wall. It's interesting to see the industry beginning to pick some of those up.
and I think Pay 2 and real-time payments is something that it's called Pay 2 in Australia, but outside of Australia there's other names. But ultimately, there's this real-time payments theme that I guess is of interest and value across the world, that's transforming a lot of these experiences, which I think is a good segue into your, I noticed in your background you had some work in the US bill pay landscape. So what is the US environment like for billers and consumers in contrast to Australia, for example?
Yeah, that's probably 10 or 15 years ago. And I guess sit back and take a sip of your coffee if you're out there and feel good about yourself and good about Australia for what you're about to hear. But I had lived outside of the United States for some time, and then I had returned. And, frankly, the state of payments and bill pay in the US was a bit confronting. I had spent quite a lot of time in Europe and Asia where you had local Giro systems, kind of like BPay and whatnot, out there that were near real time or close enough. I also forgot that in the United States, in online banking, you cannot send money out. So today in CBA, I can log in, and if I have Shaun's BSV and account number, I can actually credit you money. That's not something you can do in the United States in online banking for a number of reasons. So it's a huge market. There's a whole bunch of players, which makes it complicated. You've got deep and embedded consumer habits. One of my least favorite features I ever had to build was time and temperature on a IVR, because little community banks had little old ladies dialing in to get time and temperature from their bank, right? They've got these embedded habits in there and a bunch of legacy payment methods. So in Australia, there's BPay, which is a central directory almost everybody uses. The US doesn't have anything like that. Quite fragmented, and they're not single providers. So you have a lot of aggregators and consolidators, and a lot of billers are not electronic. So here it's quite easy to sign up for BPay or just have a bank account and the consumer can credit you money. In the US, you have these small service providers, you've got councils, you've got utilities that are not electronically signed up. And when you think about the practicality of that, what that means is, even though a consumer is in their online banking, thinking they're sending money electronically to, Deacon County Water or something like that. And in fact, what we were doing on our end is we were getting that electronic data and we were printing physical checks and mailing them. So that 25% of all bank bill pay items, as an example at the time, were physical paper check. So what does that do? That adds a lot of time, maybe 3 to 8 days. You need to print check, mail check gets received, check gets taken to a bank, or there's this magical product capability called remote deposit capture, where you can take a picture of a check with your phone. Very 21st century. But all of that adds 3 to 8 days, maybe longer. And frankly, it's fragile because it's a piece of paper going through the mail and things happen. That's the real world. That's what makes electronification pretty cool. So there's a lot to learn from other countries, but I think Australia and Australian billers should, we consider ourselves lucky that we've got a number of advanced ways to pay, and we've kind of knitted the environment together with bill pay, with BPay, the ability to just send money out of a consumer's bank account, and then the new stuff which is beginning to come on, which looks great.
Yeah, I think we do take it for granted at times, right? It's even, I think we're pretty early with the tap to pay and going other countries where you try and pay for your groceries and whatnot at checkout, and it wasn't as easy for when I was living in the UK, not that long ago too. So I think we've been early adopters, even the smartphone, right? Like we were the test bed for Apple to do a deal with all the major telcos, right? So they did an exclusivity with one telco in most markets, which inhibited the adoption of smartphones, whereas us in Australia, it was a pretty rapid uptake, and therefore we were able to do a lot more in a much shorter period. So being small, I think maybe has its advantages sometimes, but yeah, certainly, I think the US is such a large and complex market. And, in our world, in getting bills payment even into the collection space, it's like every state's almost a different country in its own right in the way they do things, right, with the regulations and whatnot, which adds another layer to it. In terms of, let's bring it back to Australia. So, to your point around a little bit easier with some of those back ends of BPAYs, et cetera, what are the most common challenges that you see holding back organizations from innovating and trying or adopting or rolling out new technologies? Is it legacy systems or the teams and the org structures themselves? Or in terms of paying a bill, like not the most pressing problem to solve. Have you got a view on that?
It's very specific to the organization. I mean, a lot of times you see it, you said the quantum, how much money are we really talking about? If we make it 5% more efficient, is that the best bang for our buck? So there's the quantum question. The complexity often comes up, trying to get somebody to update their SAP or ERP system to accept a slightly different thing, because now I'm going to get a pay to transaction that will be in real time. I need to do something slightly different. Those sorts of changes can be difficult, right? You're trying to make an EV out of a 1970s diesel engine, and so that's hard on the fly sometimes. Also, organizations and the permission structure, both to test and to fail. When you get right to the coal face, often of this is my engineering capacity, this is my product capacity to drive something new in the market, it tends to be quite finite. And do the people that are there, are they empowered with the knowledge that a certain amount of their time can go to their best effort projects or their ideas? That permission structure doesn't often exist. So, that's a reason, again, a sponsor, a senior organizational sponsor is really helpful there. And then fundamentally, you have that conundrum in payments and a number of other places that your first transaction is stupidly expensive. Your next one's free, basically. But in order to build that end-to-end experience and enable it with a payment and get the providers and all of that, that's a time-consuming and costly effort. So trying to figure out ways to test ideas without having to do the full catastrophe of integration is, super, super important. Afterpay, again, it was e-commerce, so it's different. But one of the biggest challenges we have is how do we quickly integrate into merchants? Getting onto the pixels and the checkout wasn't actually that complicated, like in the grand scheme of things. Updating the ERP, putting in a new payments flow, ensuring they were aware of the reporting, all of that stuff was much more considerable than getting on the page. And so a lot of organizations struggle with those issues, and you just have to think really creatively with your partners around how to get it and how to test something without the full investment to know that it works. And then you stack a whole bunch more wood behind it and off you go.
So, yes, super interesting. I understand all those points you made. What I'm taking away, so kind of start small, find small opportunities and build, and more of like an agile way of thinking, all right?
Yeah, and fake it. Right? If there are things you can do to make the customer think that, everything is wonderful and you're taking care of things manually. I mean, I remember one former boss I had at a digital only bank. They were an offshoot of a physical bank. So they were using their systems, and they couldn't get that big bank system to stop printing statements for a good reason. Yeah, I'm sure there's some people in compliance that had a very good understanding of why they wanted it printed, so they had a record or whatever the legacy reason was. In a digital world, you're sending a digital statement, right? So do you need to print it? But they couldn't get the change in the system to suppress printing statements for that, those customers was something ridiculous. It was like $1 million or something silly. So what they did is they had all the statements mailed to the office and they just shredded them. Right. And then when they got big enough, they went to the big bank and said, hey, why don't you change this? It'll be good for the environment too.
Yeah.
And off they went. But they didn't sit in a committee meeting for 9 months trying to drive through kind of a core system change in a part of the world that frankly couldn't care about the problems of that core business because they had other dishes to fry.
Yeah.
So I try to keep those things in mind of how do you try to navigate and operate in the environment and the company that you've got to try to get an outcome, because that's what success is. People talk a lot about innovation, but actually progress to me and getting things done has always delivered much more fruit than doing something shiny that is innovative but doesn't necessarily really work.
And that speed to execution, I mean, that seems to be something that Afterpay was able to achieve pretty well, right? Like getting things working and then doing things really quickly.
And there was a trade-off for that. I mean, the trade-off was that product was that product. It didn't change. It was fixed payments here and 3 payments there. Once we understood there was something that resonated with customers, we kept it simple for 2 reasons. One, not to confuse your customers and make life complicated. We kept it very simple to not lose customers, but also it was then easy to replicate multiple places. That's what we wanted to be. We wanted to be global as opposed to market dominated with, almost opening up your jacket and saying, which of these 7 watches would you like to have today? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important ethos to keep in mind.
And I don't think it matters what size business you are, right? Like if you're a $1 billion biller org or a startup, that's a good ethos to live and die by, right?
Yep. Focus.
And so I think it's good. And I guess you touched on it a little bit there. We are moving into a digital first economy. I think there's a lot of legacy still out there. So I think, someone from my world or where I've come from and even you to an extent, Kareem, we probably take it a little bit for granted that thinking that these digital kind of first ways of thinking is broadly adopted or understood. And so what would you see as, particularly in a payment context, some of the opportunities that exist, but also challenges to meeting those customer demands that, I spoke of at the introduction there around how Ubers and Apples, et cetera, have lifted up the expectations of those modern consumers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the big challenges around digital first is also remembering, and I brought this point up earlier for billers, that a lot of the world or some of the world or a small portion of the world will not be digital first. And like it or not, when we're at the coal face in contact centers, you've got to work with the lowest common denominator. We want to say it that way, right? If in the US, for example, got to take checks, got to take cash as well. They don't want to. It's expensive. It's painful, brittle, as we talked about. So I think in selling digital internally and trying to position it, it's not the solution to all. And once we pass through this door, dogs and cats will live together in peace. It's more so it's a foundation for significantly improving the quality of interaction between the consumer and your company, your staff, however you may say it. And the goal for everybody is, how do you improve that conversion and that checkout? You're not having to reach out to them 7 times. You're getting it done the first time or giving them the opportunity. So to give you an example, one of the really cool things I saw lately was I had a bill to pay and unique email address was generated for me to put into my bank, NPP, OXO, Pay2, however you want to say it. And that became the biller. So I didn't need a biller ID and that sort of thing with BPay. And then what happened was I had this biller in real time connected to my bank. So when I wanted, this was push only before Pay2, but when I wanted to send that biller money, boom. And I knew it was just done. I didn't need to wait for a couple of days for it to settle. My expectation, if I'm sending you the money immediately, kind of want it to post in your system. I want to be recognized for that. If I've just sent $5,000 down on a credit card to pay it down, I want to see that reflected quickly. There's these positives and negatives, or opportunities and expectations, that you just want to be very, very careful about not to mess up. Like again, to go to that example, if you give this great, hey, it's real time, blah, 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 somebody makes the payment and it doesn't really show up in their account for a couple of days, right? Like, that would annoy me as a consumer. Like, I appreciate you got my money quickly. Thank you. Can I have my service, please, for my benefit? So you want to make sure that it's always balanced. That to me is a really big one, right? Because billers are different, right? Sometimes they're a cost center. Sometimes they're heavily, if you're Boxtel or something like that, you may be heavily digital. If you're Wagga Wagga municipal water, you might not be as online. So you've got to really deal with that diversity.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, and to your point, there, every organisation is slightly nuanced and different in the customer base as well, and their needs and where they're living. And Australia is a pretty wide and varied country. There's all sorts of different demographics that are important to consider, and how you enable them to pay a bill ultimately, right?
Yeah. I mean, to me, the more billers can move to an environment where they're essentially debiting accounts and they have the right to debit an account within a defined mandate, I think that helps both parties, so the biller and the consumer. And then you need to think about that just to make sure you don't get your consumer offside, right? I got something hit my bank account and I wasn't ready for it. If we go back to the Afterpay experience, we were one of the most prolific SMS senders, right? Because we were a reminder, a thank you for paying, etc. We were extremely chatty, and that was for a reason, because that worked for our customers. Right? So you also have to think. You have to think through those things.
And the customer base there was a younger demographic, typically, right?
Yeah, typically, by the time you got to 2020, it was, pretty consistent with the population, cutting out, some obvious cohorts at the very old and the young and those sorts of things. But by and large, across income spectrums or credit score spectrums, if you wanted to look at it that way, and also age. I mean, the two strong demographics were millennial, or at the time, emerging Gen Z, and essentially young families,
right? Okay.
That were dealing with cash flow.
And SMS as a channel, at Glider, we see huge amounts of success in that to send out reminders and to communicate with consumers. It's ubiquitous, right? Like, it works across pretty much any device, whether it's smartphone and or an older device. It doesn't matter if it's Apple, Google, etc. Is that why you guys looked at SMS, or was there a reason for SMS in the kind of mix of the comm strategy there?
It just worked, and it resolved to the phone, and it hit the phone or notified a consumer in a more pronounced way. And sort of one of them. What were our other options? You could email. The SMS was pretty good. We're going to be taking $55 out of your account tomorrow morning. Please move money into that account. Got it. Next. Right. And they also were able to kind of keep it as a feed to look back at what their purchases were, those sorts of things. So SMS just kind of made sense. We looked at WhatsApp as a messaging channel, or iMessage, and we would have saved money. We go back to that kind of money conundrum, but that wasn't our biggest problem. Even though we were paying a lot of money in SMS fees, our biggest problem wasn't improving the bottom line by 1%, because we moved to a cheaper way of distributing messages and whatever negative impact it have on performance of the business. And it was like we had bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay. Yeah, super interesting.
And also, I guess I have a question for you, because through the years, I've been sitting, I've been waiting for kind of the SMS 2.0 capability, or I think RCS is what it's called, where there could be a lot more interactive messaging and those sorts of things. We're in a paradigm right now where I can send you a link, which, is problematic sometimes because of phishing, but I can send you a link. You can click on that link and I can take you to that. You need to pay your $55 parking fee, right? When and what will this RCS stuff look like? Because I'd rather self-serve, wouldn't we all?
Yeah, for
Or
sure.
would most of us?
RCS it's not a new technology, right? Like, it's been around for over a decade, I believe. It's a Google innovation. And I think, like everything in digital, there's dependencies to reach that level of ubiquitous, and it just working. Apple for many years hadn't supported it on their OS. Obviously, the big change there was the announcement back at the developer conference a few months back that they're going to be rolling it out into iOS 18 across every market. So, yeah, it's super exciting. It's being referenced as SMS 2.0 because it's the best of MMS, and SMS sort of going to deliver that WhatsApp, messaging experience for two-way comms without the need to install any native apps. So in your messaging app and iOS.
And so if we think of like the Wagga Wagga Water Authority interacting with you because for some reason maybe you were late, what will that actually look like?
Yeah, for sure.
Or what could it look like?
So it's not quite available in Australia yet. It is in some markets, France and Singapore is being tested, and a few others, UK. But ultimately, RCS is going to improve the customer experience because, to your point, there are a level of concern around phishing scams and links and whatnot. So for a start, it's going to have a verified sender ID that the council is going to be able to qualify that this is us, and the customer's going to feel safer that this is who it's meant to be talking to me. And beyond that, there's going to be additional ways that you can, for example, from a business, instead of it just being a delivered report, you're going to, like you see in iMessage, have those read receipts, right? So we can see that customer has actually read the message that you've sent, as opposed to it just being delivered. So uplifting those understandings of the way that someone is engaging with your content back to the consumer experience. We can add images into that from an e-com environment. There can be carousels. There's just going to be huge amounts of richness that's going to be brought into these native communications that will very quickly make the current SMS experience look super dated, and we'll be going, wow, that was what it was like, right? My kid was asking me on this. I was filling out a doctor's form, and it said home and mobile, and my daughter was like, "What's home, Daddy? Like, what's a home phone already?" So very quickly these things are going to advance, and at Glider particularly, we're super excited about the way that this is going to advance the billing experience. Things like setting reminders, or allowing you to interact in a more two-way fashion. Self-serve is obviously super important. You can do that already, but allowing you to confidence that I'm engaging with the right brand here, and my information's secure. So that customer experience that is more than just clicking on a link and what you see on the page, but all that emotional kind of feelings that you get when you're engaging with a brand is going to be able to be brought to life easily. So yeah, look, hopefully the telcos in Australia supporting that early 20. Yeah, we're certainly working with organisations already on strategies about how we can leverage use cases around RCS and what that might look like for them.
Yeah, I mean, even trying to collect cards or accounts on file, right?
Yep.
And running campaigns to do that.
And so looking ahead, what emerging technologies we've talked to us, obviously there's a lot of buzz around AI, but in terms of the payments industry, what do you think is going to have the greatest impact on customer experiences in the near, mid and longer term outlooks?
I think in the short term, we are able to be a bit more practical. So in the short term, I think things like the benefits of account updater and card tokenization and those sorts of things, should now filter through to most billers, so that if you do have a card on file, it will automatically update when it's deleted or canceled or lost or whatever. So you're not chasing that, call it 15% portfolio problem where your cards are always expiring. I think those things in the short term will be really, really valuable. In the medium term, I think we will see a lot of rationalization. And what I mean by that is, right now, where are my payment credentials? Where are my card numbers or bank account numbers? I mean, they're in a couple of browsers on my phone, on my computer. Google's now sort of connected those. So now it's, essentially a Google Wallet with those credentials, or a Google Pay capability that isn't a payment wallet necessarily, or there's a Chrome extension that it goes straight into Chrome, or people have password managers that pop up. I highly recommend those to every single human being on Earth, to get a password manager. You've got your phone wallets, your Apple Pays and your Google Pays that then have issues across platforms and different types of platforms that they'll try to solve for. But see, you've got your payment credentials all of a sudden a whole bunch of places. And I think over the medium term, there'll hopefully be a simplification, because that's better for customers to not have their business everywhere and having to be thinking about, where am I going to manage that? And do I need to delete my card from Foxtel? And the way their UI works, does it even really allow me to delete the card if I don't put another one in? And all of that business. I think that's going to start to rationalize in the medium term as consumers begin to pick winners out of this happy chaos moment, where I don't have to memorize my card number or have it with me all the time, right? I've got the benefit of having it saved, but now it's saved in a whole bunch of places. So it's like having 15 different emails and then suddenly realizing, oh, wait, I can direct them all into one inbox or two inboxes. Makes your life a lot better, just the cognitive load of it. So I think we'll start to see that a good bit with saved credentials. And I think in the long term, to wrap up answering your question, I am personally a huge believer in Pay2 and NPP and what real-time bank payments should deliver to the Australian market. For billers, I think there's huge opportunity around that. But if people aren't aware, the concept of Pay2, where you as a biller or someone else can debit an amount from a consumer's bank in real time based on a mandate authority, a authority the consumer has explicitly agreed to, that says, I will allow them to take a fixed amount, a variable amount on this cycle or over this period. So there's details of control that, again, put power back in the consumer's hands where it should be, as opposed to, the lottery ticket of, oh, well, did I give them my card or did I give them my bank account? And if they're going to debit me, it might debit me a couple of days later. I don't really know when it's coming in, blah, 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 blah. Like, nobody wants that in their life. Life is too complicated anyway. So I think NPP helps to do that, because it does concentrate your payments and your billers in probably your bank. Other players will try to do it. So there'll be competition around where it stands. The banks have a really good head start. But I think that will probably, between those three, start to change the game in the billing world.
Yeah. Hey, Kareem, this has been really interesting. We are at time and need to start wrapping it up. I no doubt could chat all day on a bunch of different things with you. So thank you for your time. If I was to summarize today, there's certainly an alignment in the way that we see the world. What's the purpose of it? Not doing something just for the sake of it, and bring it back to outcomes, simplifying things from a consumer's perspective, trying to, break things down into smaller chunks. You don't need to go for the big bang all at once. Try to fail fast, probably, if you're looking for, opportunities and reasons to do things.
Both of those are super empowering to your teams.
Yep.
Right. To help them move quickly without feeling the burden of the world of having to make it perfect. And if it fails, it fails.
And also, you mentioned obviously getting a champion on board to push it internally, but getting those small wins, the bits of data to prove out ideas and concepts to then make bigger investments over time would be another advantage of that, I imagine.
100%.
it all makes sense with that, short, medium, and longer term. Getting the basics, foundations in place, and moving to those more advanced opportunities over time. But would there be anything else that you'd wanted to add?
Not too much. I mean, if there are billers out there, having lived on that side of the world before, just have little bit of sympathy or empathy for yourselves. It's hard. You've got to meet that lowest common denominator, and it can be hard to do things because you're usually not brand new. You're usually not all digital, and just be okay with that. That's the world we live in. And try not to beat yourself up if you're still getting that one check sent in from Broken Hill that you need to clear at the bank. Like, that's just life. Great. Thank you very much, Shaun. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak.
No, Kareem. Thanks again for your time, and look forward to catching up shortly.